The Why Didn't You Test That podcast want to improve your software. The team at Curiosity and their guests share experiences and insight on the many sides of better software delivery.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the Why Didn't You Test That podcast. Joining me again today is James Walker. Say hello, James.
Hi everyone, thanks Rich, pleasure to be here.
Cool, and our very special guest today is Tom Riglar. So I've just got a very quick bio for Tom to read out before I invite him to come and talk. So Tom is an automation engineer and entrepreneur focused on the mobile app space. After successfully building and exiting a mobile app development agency, he is now focused on Moropo, a low-code end-to-end testing tool for iOS and Android. When he's not coding or creating tutorials, you'll usually find him on his bike exploring the southwest of England. Hi, Tom. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Rich. Thanks for having me.
No worries. A very quick one on watching the tutorials. I've just gone and had a look on the Moropo website, and there is a great little 4-minute video of Tom introducing Moropo, the company and the software. Go and have a look at that. It's really informative. I encourage you to go and see that. Do you want to just give a quick overview of kind of what you do, what Moropo do, and yeah, let's get into it.
Yeah, sure. So I'm one of the co-founders at Moropo, and we're, as you say, a low-code mobile app testing platform. My job is anything from coding through to marketing, sales. I'm a bit of a generalist. I like to get stuck into all sorts of bits. My background is a software developer. So I actually came into the testing world from basically trying to avoid testing, realizing that didn't work, and then working out how I could get around that problem.
Cool. So, we've talked about kind of the subject of where we're going to go with this. Obviously, we're going to touch on mobile app testing, but we also discussed before the podcast that we talk a little around the complexity of kind of engaging with large organizations, some startup organizations, for example, the difference between the two, some of the struggles. Obviously, Moropo, you've got experience of engaging with kind of both sets of kind of the simple and the complex. Do you want to just kind of talk about the Moropo story in terms of the different types of client that you're engaging with?
Yeah, sure. So it started off as a side project out of the agency, actually. So we were a small agency building React Native apps, mostly in the startup space. And testing happened between our clients and our project manager. And our project manager, bless him, he ended up doing a lot of manual testing. And so after a few months of him pulling his hair out and repeating the same old steps over and over again, we decided to explore some automation. Unfortunately, we had some great clients who are really on board with this. And they're like, yeah, let's automate this testing. Let's get this done. And there was high optimism in the office. But unfortunately, after many weeks of playing around with different automation options, and we did this a couple of times as well over a couple of years, and we just got frustrated, and we'd end up implementing this automation, spending weeks doing it. Initially, we did Appium, and then we did a XE UI test and UI Automator project as well. But what happened is it just didn't get adopted. So the maintenance cost was so high and the creation cost was so high and the results inspection was so poor and so inaccessible to some of the non-technical team members that it just ended up getting abandoned really every time. So we started out building our own system, and then we won some Innovate UK grant money to take that prototype and properly build it out into a marketable product. And that's where we are with Moropo. So the goals that we set out with Moropo was that you should be able to go and build your first test in minutes. You should have no local setup at all. You don't need a particular computer. You don't need Android Studio. You don't need Xcode. And you can go and do this without being a technical person. If you're a project manager or product manager, you're a junior QA who's never done any automation, you can go in and you can use the system and you can produce some mid-level complexity test automation on iOS and Android without having any of that previous experience.
Cool. So I'll just invite James in to come in here in terms of, I guess, in terms of the story Tom told there in terms of engaging with organizations that really struggle to kind of get going when it comes to automation, some might say kind of setting foundations around testing in of itself, right? I think we have very similar experiences in Curiosity as well. Do you just want to kind of talk to some of your experiences of engaging organizations where getting testing more efficient and effective has really been a struggle?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. I think what I'm seeing in organizations at the moment is, this is probably true for the past decade, right? Everyone is so focused on developer productivity. It's how can we make developers faster? Let's spend all the budget on developer tooling, GitHub Copilot, whatever. And the reality is testing is always left far too late. And it's always a struggle for organizations, right? And they just don't have good enough talent to come in and do the automation. It's always left as a bottleneck till the end. And that has so many knock-on effects. Like, it ends up delaying the release. We end up cutting corners. We don't test everything we can. So I think, automation is absolutely critical. I mean, I first came across Tom, I think on LinkedIn we met, right? And I was quite inspired because, to me, organizations always struggle with automation. It doesn't matter what you're doing, right? Like, web automation is really, really hard as it is. You have to go in, pull out the identifiers. It's always tricky. It's very fragile. It breaks a lot. But then by the time you get into mobile automation, that's like 10 degrees even harder, right? It's so challenging. So I was really interested in Tom because I went along, looked at the website, downloaded the tool, had a go, and actually you could build up tests very quickly, right? So I think that's super interesting. Like, I really like what you're doing, Tom.
I think there's a point as well, really, about there's many more developers to QA personnel. So I was looking at some stats today around. I think it's from old JetBrains survey, but 43% of respondents had less than one QA per 10 developers. So inevitably, when those developers get promoted and they start to oversee those QA teams, there's always that bias, isn't there, to focus on those developer tools, to have that optimistic mindset about building. And I think that's what I've learned as a developer or as an ex-developer, is actually to be a lot more critical about what we're producing.
I agree with that. I think it's very naive to come in and a lot of people have these kind of rose-tinted glasses on, whereas actually software is all about programming. And there's so much stuff around the edges, right? Like good requirements, good test cases when that feature comes through into release, etc. Having a good regression test pack, having a solid CI/CD. Like, there's so much stuff that wraps around this whole programming ecosystem. I think it's really often overlooked, right?
It's something that we're very aware of in Moropo, because if you look at where software creators spend their time, for me, for example, it's usually GitHub. And GitHub, sure, it's got a code repository, it's got a few CI/CD features, but the space for testing in a tool like that is actually very small. And so what we're hoping to do and achieving with some of our clients in Moropo is actually having a space where all of that testing is front and center. It's a place where QA personnel can go and they can manage the tests and they can see the results, and it gives them a place to focus on that part of the software creation process.
Would you obviously you guys are concentrated within the mobile app development space. Is that challenge greater within that space than kind of more traditional software development, or is it kind of the same problem regardless?
Mobile is challenging, and I used to work in web, so moving into mobile, it was initially very tricky, and most of that's because the limitations that Google and Apple put on the ecosystems. So, and that's through two main mechanisms, really. One is that they control the operating systems, and Apple in particular, forces you through Xcode at some point. It doesn't really matter which app development framework you're using, you have to go and build it on a Mac. And Google, to a lesser extent, with Android Studio and all of the dependencies there. And inside those operating systems, there's loads of complexities, privacy and permissions being a big one recently. Lots of apps breaking because of that, and lots of restrictions on the APIs that we can use because of that as well. And then the other one is the deployment mechanisms, going through the app stores. There are code push technologies that allow us to put a bug fix through in a few minutes, and we can go and push that out to live users. But for most app releases, we're going through the App Store release mechanism, and that's hours, sometimes even days. If you push a big update and Apple flag it for review, then a human's going to go and review that, and you could be days waiting to get that release approved. If that release is there because it's patching a bug that's costing your existing app version revenue, then that's like a nightmare situation. And that's just something that doesn't exist in web, because in web we have a lot more control over those deployment mechanisms.
Okay. If you were asked to summarize the state of mobile testing, I guess as honestly as you can be, the spectrum of kind of different flavors do you see out there?
Yeah, there's an immense skepticism from teams, especially around UI testing, end-to-end testing. There's a lot of what I'm seeing is increasingly amounts of QA process that's baked in earlier with developers. Something like static code checking, for example, or maybe some snapshot testing of components. That happens a lot more than the stuff that we do, the UI testing.
Yeah.
And that's a traditional skepticism, I think, a lot because Appium has really challenging developer experience, really challenging tester experience. There's a lot of setup process involved, and that's really challenging. But also the integration testing libraries that ship with a lot of the frameworks don't allow you to. They test at an app level, not an OS level. But in the mobile space, the interaction between the operating system functions and the application are a lot more intricate than what you would get in the web world. In web you can get away with just running up a virtual browser, and you everything really happens inside that virtual browser. In mobile, for example, the most often encountered issue is around web views. So if you've got an OAuth plugin, for example, that's going to push out to a web view. And so suddenly the component rendering mechanism is completely different. And so teams bump into one or two of those issues as they attempt to adopt something like Appium or one of the alternatives. And then they kind of fall flat on their face and they're like, okay, let's just avoid this. We'll go and look at other testing mechanisms or rely on manual.
And about you say, James, is that kind of your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think with mobile, it's particularly difficult because there's such a whole world of complexity, as Tom was saying there, right? Like if you're in a browser, it's not like you're going to go out and buy every single laptop type in the world and test on it, right? But with mobile, you're so tightly integrated to the OS and the device you're working on. Actually, you do need to test against all these different devices, right? Like you need to test against a Google Pixel 8, a Google Pixel 7, etc. And it makes me laugh a bit because my wife actually, she works for Google. She's product manager on the Android platform. And she has this like massive box of just like millions of different phones because of that exact same reason, right? Like you need to go out and you need to see how the app and how everything responds on those particular combinations of devices, right? It's really, really challenging. And I think the complexity is just so much more than, in the web browser world, right?
Yeah. You mentioned there as well in terms of kind of the from the lower level developer kind of testing element that there is a kind of a drive to improve that. To your point you made at the start around adoption and people don't necessarily adopt certain things, why doesn't that tend to happen when you get into the later development into traditional test kind of disciplines?
Yeah, well, the shift left movement, I think, is causing a lot of this, right? So and people misinterpret shift left as make the developers do the testing, and it's really not. It's really about what quality activities can happen earlier in that process, and that's not just developers. That starts with requirements gathering. It moves into design. It moves it through into code creation and into the QA process itself, and also in release. So I had a call with a prospect a few months ago, and they're like, we've got 30 developers and no QA, and all of the developers do all of the testing. And I can understand that mindset, but for me, that fundamentally undermines what testing is about, right? It's about having that check and being in that separate mindset where you're critical
It's that independence,
of
isn't it?
what
Yeah.
could go wrong. And so there's a lot of misunderstanding there. And actually, I mean, Moropo itself doesn't work well with developers. Developers don't like our product. They tend to want to go and be much more code focused, and we're a low code tool. But what it does work really well with is QA team, who don't necessarily want to code and can actually go through and build out those tests without needing that technical knowledge.
Yeah. That's an interesting part there around, large organizations enacting change. Transformation takes a hell of a long time. Almost the ability for individual teams to reject change, or as an apathy, and we've always done it this way, and therefore we will carry on doing it that way. I guess there's 2 points there in terms of it's interesting that we see this through the whole modeling process and almost slowing yourself down to create a model, i.e. requirement or a design, so you can go faster in the future. But your developers, they want the right code, and therefore they reject almost setting the foundations at the start, right, and end up being slower in the long term. And interestingly, you kind of articulated the same thing, right? And the perception is that actually, because this isn't code, this will only slow me down. I assume is the challenge that they will talk to, right?
I mean, developers want to create, and they want to create using code. So what often happens is, and I borrow a term from film for this, for below the line work and above the line work. Right. So in film, in TV, below the line work, that's all the stuff, the production team, the
Yeah.
camera operators, the Sparkies, the audio engineer, and then you've got the above the line work, which is the script writers, the cast, the directors. And it's that above the line work that gets you on to the Cannes festival. It gets you
Yeah.
that Grammy. Not Grammy, that's music, but you get the idea.
Yeah.
And as developers, we have a tendency to focus on that below the line work. So when it comes to a quality challenge into the quality engineering space, it's what we should be doing is saying, okay, my app is a language app. How do I focus on those language features and write tests that test those language features and ensure quality for my app users? But what we tend to do is we go for the lower hanging fruit in some ways, which is, how do I set up my virtual device farm so that I can run my tests? Or how do I scale out my CI/CD pipelines? And we end up doing a lot of work that happens exactly the same in every organization. Every mobile app company of a certain size is working out how to scale out their virtual device farm. And so you end up repeating that same work over and over again. And that's the stuff where tools work really well. But it's the above the line work. That's the stuff that's going to wow your users. And that's where your best people should be doing their best work in a particular organization.
James, this aligns quite a lot to the kind of the inner and the outer loop kind of stuff. Do you want to kind of elaborate in terms of the way that we would see that?
I mean, for me, it's not new, right? Like organizations have always had these problems, and they've always been making the same complaints, right? Like testing is too slow. My releases keep getting delayed and pushed out. My team's always firefighting, Sev1 issues, and they're always down in the weeds working on that, right? And I think to your point there, Tom, like a lot of organizations are so focused on these like quick fix kind of painkiller solutions, and it's not, which is kind of below the line, and they're not moving above the line, right? So it's like testing is too slow. Let's introduce automation. My team's always firefighting. Well, we need to go and hire more developers so we have more bandwidth to work on roadmap stuff, right? And I think what I've seen, certainly with the organizations that we've been talking to, is there is so much of a focus on the developer, and there's not enough focus on this, above the line work, right? And it's like, okay, testing is too slow. It's a bottleneck because we didn't do enough stuff earlier, right? We didn't shift left. We didn't set ourselves up for success. We left testing till the end instead. We can't hire good enough talent. Well, why do we need amazing talent? We need good talent, and we need more developers. because we have lots of gaps in our requirement, and we need these amazing people to help fill that hole and make up for all the, lack of clarity around everything that we need to be built, right? So I think we're kind of seeing the same, Tom. Like, everyone is so focused on below the line, and then when they see the problems that occur, it's always, well, how can we unblock development and make them faster, rather than saying, let's strip things back. What is the root cause of the issue? How do we address that and move forward with? So we're seeing lots of organizations aware of these problems. They're spending money on solutions, but in my head, they're almost spending money on the wrong solutions.
This is where things like is it the 5 Whys framework?
Yeah.
I never remember exactly how many Whys it is, but I think
it's 5. Yeah.
And you just got to strip back the layers and layers and layers and ask those difficult questions.
One of the challenges, especially around testing into quality is it's really hard to articulate what it is and what it means to said stakeholder, right? And a lot of the time, writing of code, hitting a deadline, they are very tangible things that can be measured, right? Whereas some of these things, what does quality mean? I'm not quite sure. If I'm looking for things to cut, well, I can cut that because I can't measure it and I can't quite articulate it, and therefore the perception is that it's an overhead. Put you on the spot here with a really difficult one. Are there any effective ways to try and better understand, measure, articulate what does quality mean, so we kind of are more conscious of that above the line kind of stuff that as a wider organization, as a development team, we need to be doing?
Like, I don't think there's any hard and fast answer. And, to me, it's all about the outcome, right? Like, what am I trying to achieve here? Like, for a lot of organizations, it's creating a bit of software that delivers some kind of business value to people. And as I'm thinking about this, so I saw a post on LinkedIn the other day, and it was talking about how great Python is. And then people were commenting on it, Python versus Java, Python versus whatever. And I was like, who cares? Like, honest to God, like, hand on heart, what does it matter? Like, fundamentally, like, that's great that your development team can pick a language, but if the software works, it delivers value. That's the most important thing, right? So I think it very much depends what domain you're in and how important it is. If you're developing software for, an airline or an airplane, you probably want to make sure that every single piece works and you have very low risk, right? If you're developing a SaaS solution, you've got, 10 to 100 users, then your appetite for risk is probably a little bit higher and your definition of quality is much different, right? So I think it's going to be very dependent between organization to organization, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah. What about yourself, Tom? I'm conscious from kind of being involved in an organization that had mobile apps in the past, and it seems that there is a lot more interest and insight around things like app scores, right? So there is a more qualitative measure when it comes to that type of technology. Is there that challenge obviously exists still in terms of what does it actually mean? But there seems to be more kind of vehicles to measure these kind of things in that world.
I come from a startup background, right? So in enterprise, there's obviously a more nuanced focus on quality, but in the startup world, what we're looking to do is create a net benefit for our users as quickly as possible. Is this version of the app we're about to release better than what they currently have on their phones?
Yeah.
And we want to ascertain that it's better as quickly as possible so that we can get those new features or bug fixes that we've created out as quickly as possible. So, with a lot of our customers, it's all about shortening that cycle. And that's where I try to think about how you should budget for QA, because a lot of people do view it as a cost. They think, how can we minimize this so that it's as low as possible because it's just the thing that we have to do. But actually, there's huge opportunities in QA, and that shortening of the development life cycle is the biggest lever for us. Being able to test earlier in the process, get confident about your release, and push it out quicker and iterate on it. That's the big benefit we see.
I also think these KPIs probably trickle down in some way as well, or rather they should, right? If I was CEO of a big company, then revenue is probably going to be one of the biggest things I'm reporting on, right? And then, okay, that trickles down. Well, how can we increase our top line this year? Well, last year, our net promoter score or our, ratings, whatever you want to call them, is low. Churn is a big issue. Go deeper into that. Why is churn an issue? Well, potentially quality was a big focus on that, right? We weren't delivering the user experiences we wanted to. Users have frustrations with our application and the quality in it, so they moved away from it. So, I'm not particularly sure if that actually happens in organizations or not, but I actually think that quality has a massive impact on bottom line, right? It's not the same as 20, 30 years ago, where you would go to a trade show, you would find a piece of software, you would buy it, and, it's really hard to migrate away from it. It's so easy to migrate between different tools now, right?
Well, I was going to say there's competition for everything now. I mean, we see this a lot in the change of a concept of an MVP, a minimum viable product.
Yeah.
Is that it used to be, I can't remember what the quote is, but it used to be that the first, you should be embarrassed by the first version of your software, and that's no longer the case because everyone's expectations are so much higher. That quality bar is so much higher, and so people are much less tolerant of bugs and UX issues than they used to be, and that's a real challenge for us as people involved in the software creation process, because that quality needs to be baked in from the start.
So you touched on you came from a startup, you worked with startups, and you started to now work with bigger enterprises. Enterprises are a big ball of mud sometimes, right? And so, one of the problems around understanding value, for lots of teams within that organization is many kind of products outwardly are made up of many teams internally, and so some teams struggle to see the value they add to particular products. Sometimes there is very embedded ways of working. Sometimes they are blindly following process, and therefore we mustn't deviate away from that process. What kind of challenges, obviously, as a kind of a software vendor selling products into those organizations, but on the flip side of that, an organization truly wanting to transform themselves to be more efficient and effective, what kind of challenges do you see?
What I am seeing is that the larger or the more technically mature the teams, the more compartmentalized they see the different parts of the testing infrastructure. Moropo is an all-in-one tool, so we've got the test creation, test case management, results inspection, CI/CD integration. That all exists inside of a single tool, and you can go and access that on the web. But with these larger organizations, is they require a lot more granularity in terms of the different pieces of that puzzle. And so, we've spent a lot of work adding API layers so that they can use the different parts of it, or go and pick and choose from the different parts of the product. And I think also the sense that these larger organizations want to own their own processes, and they want to manage those processes and tinker with those processes and feel like they're in control of them. And that's something we've been working a lot on, is trying to make sure we're better integrated inside their systems and processes.
I think it is a mindset. I mean, I have so much respect for anyone who is in a leadership position in an enterprise. Curiosity, I think we're about 33, 34 employees now, and getting everyone together and aligned and moving in a certain direction is hard. If you have like 5,000 to 10,000 plus employees, it must be so hard to get everyone on the same page and moving in the right direction. And, it's easy from the outside to look and say, enterprises move too slow. They're not fast enough. Well, there's kind of a reason for that. Like, it's really hard to get everyone on the same page, right? And that scale and complexity, all the regulation that's involved, like there's so many unique challenges in enterprise, I feel. So sometimes I'm really happy looking on the outside in and being able to advise on that and not being in there inside myself. But it's interesting, right? There's so many unique problems. And I almost think everything is amplified, right? It's 100 to 1,000 times bigger. There's 100 times more complexity. The organization is probably an incumbent. They've been going for 20, 30, 40 years, maybe longer. So there's a lot of legacy. People have come and gone. There's all these kind of older systems that are not well understood. For a startup or for any like small to medium company, there's so much opportunity to help enterprises because we are on the outside. We can innovate quickly. We can deliver solutions that help enterprises solve problems that they just don't have a hope in hell of building themselves and solving themselves, right? And that's the opportunity, I think.
Going back to the conversation we were having earlier on around kind of how do you define quality, right? You've got lots of different layers. So you've got the complication of the IT infrastructure. So a lot of infrastructure that's intermingled and ever changing. There's an ecosystem of change there, and so how do you keep up with that, right? I was watching the Post Office inquiry the other day, and I can't remember who was on it, but one of the guys, I think he was kind of the ex or interim CEO, right? And it was quite not eye-opening, but quite refreshing that he explained that we don't really understand how the Horizon system works and why should we expect to. And I think that's true of any large organization, right? In that your whole ecosystem is changing. And one of your biggest battles is how do you keep up with understanding how that system should work and how it should change? Yeah, and all organizations, I think, will have that challenge with the static documentation or the static ways of working that they've consistently worked with. It doesn't help in terms of understanding that, which is why you have these kind of 30-year-old SMEs that have been in the organization who know these things and nobody else does, right? That's why those things grow up. But then you've got another layer there in terms of politics and project management and things like that, right? Where, what does quality mean to a project manager? Hitting a date, right? That's what quality means to them, right? So you've got this trade-off between what quality truly means in terms of the product that we're offering versus what does it mean to different stakeholders with different views in the organization. Do you really want to take a risk on changing your testing ways of working and risk not hitting that deadline? I think there's lots of intermingling dynamics where just producing IT products isn't the only thing that's going on. I'm assuming you will come across that a lot in terms of trying to intercept teams where they're inefficient, but yet you've got some stakeholders like project managers who hold the budget who just want to keep doing the same thing. Is that?
This is something that James and I spoke about a few weeks ago, actually, is that we're a tool provider, right? We build a tool, and in theory, people go and use that tool and they never speak to us. But and that's what happens in the first couple of weeks. But in reality, what happens is that as they uncover, they do all the low-hanging fruit, they automate all the easy stuff, and then the complex stuff comes out of the box. Stuff that we didn't necessarily support. Drag and drop. We had an Android drag and drop widget requirement from someone the other day, and so that's when we start to come in and add a professional services layer on top, right? Because it's not just the tooling that these larger organizations need, it's also the thought leadership as well, and the strategies and tactics that come with that. Because for them, they want to offload that whole problem. The solution really is the detail. And so that's what they come for the tool, but they stay for the customer service.
I also think, what's happened now is organizations are competing on software. Almost every organization in every industry now is a software company in some shape or form. I don't think there's any escaping that. And I think the reality now is what we're seeing with AI, it is a transformative technology, right? It's disrupting industries. And what I'm seeing now is a lot of organizations are very worried. They've got all of these different AI initiatives, everything going on inside, because they're really seeing that actually the competitive landscape is changing now. Industries are going to be disrupted. And if they don't keep up and innovate in those areas, they're going to fall behind, right? So I think while that could work before, because there wasn't really these fundamental shifts happening, you could sit there for 10 years, you're a big company, you've got massive market share, carry on that trajectory, not a problem, maybe grow by 0.5% every year. And that's, everyone's done a great job, right? Whereas now, industries are being disrupted and organizations are going to have to innovate and fundamentally change what they're doing to keep up with the rate of everything going on, right? And to be able to keep their market share and everything from it. So I think we're having lots of interesting conversations now, but definitely that was a problem before. And the organizations who don't change are going to suffer fundamentally. I don't think there's any escaping that.
You had to go there on the AI thing, didn't you, James?
I'm sorry, it's just my favourite topic.
I'll open that out to Tom in terms of are you getting engaged in a lot of conversations where the obvious question is, does your tool do AI?
We do get asked it a lot, and the answer is no, it doesn't. Which is a semi-intentional choice, partly because our main direct competitors are very AI focused, and we actually get quite a bit of business from the people who don't want the shiny AI stuff. They just want
Yeah.
a simple tool that's going to empower them to do bits and pieces. But we use some AI tooling inside our organization, and I think that there is great potential there. The main shift for me, really, in terms of AI and all modern tooling, is the headcount. We're a small team, but we're more productive than ever with a small team, and I'm seeing that trend across other founders and other organizations as well. Is that AI lets you do more with less people, and I think that's what these bigger orgs are going to struggle with, is because as you reduce that headcount down as well, you can inherently become more nimble. And so the organizations that do adopt the right tooling, they're going to be moving faster than ever, with fewer and fewer people as well.
I think that's really interesting, Tom. We've seen the same with AI as well. We can do so much more than we could before, and it's made the whole team more efficient as part of that, right? I think my worry in organizations, if you look at a lot of the initiatives that are going on, and even in the industry in general, right, all the focus is still on developer productivity. So if you look at all the noise being made, it's all about these kind of coding agents. Like I think Devon was one of them, although I think that turned out to be fake. And then GitHub just made. I think so. Yeah, I might be wrong. There was some scandal. But then if you look at GitHub, just made a big announcement that they've incorporated this AI coding agent into like their workspaces or something. So for me, that's going to make developers even faster, which is fantastic. You look at all the tooling around the edges and everything we're doing, above the line that you were talking about earlier, Tom. What good tooling exists to help me create better requirements, which, leverages and makes me more productive, right? The same with testing, the same with CI/CD. Like it's so lacking. And I think what we're going to see in organizations is all of those problems that we've discussed in this podcast amplified. Developers are going to be more productive. Everything else is going to be more of a bottleneck. Quality is going to decline as a result. And guess what? AI generates bad code as well. It's buggy. It's untrustworthy. It needs to be tested more. So, I mean, it's great for us in this space. I think we're going to be, called on much more, and everything's going to come from that. But I genuinely am worried about organizations that quality is just going to drop as a result, and everything's going to be a mess more than it is now, right? Just for a lack of focus, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Developers, I think, are going to be forced to change their role from pure code creation into more of a orchestration role.
That's interesting.
It's a bit of, especially in smaller organizations, that QA person, that developer, that product manager, the designer, they start to become a single role, but only a person who is able to move between those domains and able to understand the way to integrate those tools and work and piece them all together, that becomes a super powerful person. But in order to actually move into that for developers and for anyone else, you have to let go of being single-minded. It's not just about writing code anymore. It's about piecing different bits together and having that overseer.
So, final question: if you could put out a call to arms, whatever you want, but either around mobile development or testing or complex organizations, if you were to have a call to arms around what these organizations should do to improve their day-to-day work, their efficiency, their effectiveness, what kind of advice would you give them?
I would say it's incredibly easy to automate the 80% of the easiest of your user flows, right? And so go and do that because it's easy and get it out of the way, and give your testers time to focus on the complex things.
I think for me, what I'm probably not going to answer the question here, but I'm just going to talk. I think for me, the most interesting thing at the moment is this whole kind of quality engineering role that's appearing. And I think if I was an organization now, I didn't have a quality engineer, I would probably go and hire one. Just because I think having someone there who is looking at quality holistically, looking at the software development lifecycle, thinking about how can I improve quality across it, which, Tom, to your point earlier, is not just testing, it's requirements, it's automation, it's looking at everything more effectively. How can we drive quality? How can we make this process more efficient? And I think that's probably, the best piece of advice for me. I would go and hire a quality engineer. That's it. Done. Yeah.
Brilliant insights, brilliant advice. Go and have a look at Moropo. Tom, if people want to engage with you, what's the best way?
LinkedIn, Tom Riglar. There's not many Tom Riglars in the world, so you should find me pretty quick.
There you go. Go and connect with Tom on LinkedIn. Obviously, connect with either myself or James if you really want to. But thanks again for listening, and come back next time for the Why Didn't You Test That podcast.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Why Didn't You Test That podcast. To continue the conversation, head over to curiositiesoftware.ie. And don't forget to subscribe for more episodes.